So instead of doing my university work or spending time with my fiance, I've decided to record a video all about Hotline Miami, which will probably look as good as a 2010 gaming video using the Bandicam trial. Hotline Miami is a top-down shooter created by Jonathan Sonderstrom and Dennis Whedon, who created Dennaton Games and Abstraction Games. The game was published by our good old friends at Devolver Digital in 2012, and if you remember from the last video essay I did many moons ago, they also published Enter the Gungeon, so they really have a knack for these shoot-'em-up games. The game is extremely violent, very extreme. You can be somewhat stealthy in this game, but you'll probably be caught by someone or dogs anyways, so you may as well just hack and slash and shoot everyone while you can. It is set in the 80s, and so the neon visuals and great soundtrack are based around that era. The main influence for this game was David Lynch, who is a filmmaker and painter that you might know from things such as Twin Peaks, Dune, and Eraserhead. Another influence was the movie Drive, starring the one and only Ryan Gosling. Oh, I love that man. This game received much praise upon release, which is highly deserved with the themes, plot, gameplay, the art style. Just the whole thing is great. The ultra-violent, close combat game received a 10 out of 10 from Eurogamer and an 8.8 out of 10 from IGN. The soundtrack is one of the best game soundtracks I've heard, with the only game coming close, in my opinion, being Doom, but the one that was released back in 2016. And the soundtrack fits each situation perfectly, and Hotline Miami 2, which I will get onto later, still holds up that surreal, dreamy, high-octane style, but doesn't hold up as well. This fast-paced action combined with intense difficulty throughout makes the game addictive. You can complete the game fairly quickly in just 5 hours, which I don't think is a bad thing. The game sets out the plot and concludes it nicely, which, to be quite honest, on my first couple of playthroughs I didn't really care about. I just wanted to speedrun the game and shoot a bunch of people, but nonetheless the plot isn't really confusing, it's just you killing off the Russian mafia really, but it is surreal, as we will come on to later, where everything just isn't quite right. Overall, the mechanics of the game are simple. It's just point and shoot and scope out the area, see how many enemies there are and their pattern of walking. But if you're not the type to be stealthy, then you'll probably just run in and not care about alerting enemies. But watch out for the dogs. For the love of God, they always ran up to me out of nowhere and it literally was just like a jump scare. And the choice of wearing masks that each come with their own abilities is also a nice touch. It means that you can go into each level with an ability you think will be best to beat it. It's 1989 and your character is in the wonderful city of Miami. Or at least I think it's wonderful. I've never actually been out of the country except to go to Disneyland Paris, so if Miami isn't great, I'm sorry, I guess? Your character has no name. One day, he receives an answering machine message about a supposed delivery of cookies to his home. He finds a package outside containing a rooster mask, along with instructions to perform a hit on the Russian mafia and steal a briefcase that is in their possession. Failure is not an option. After this mission has been completed, he receives more messages on his answering machine, each asking him to take care of a certain problem at a specific address, again relating to the Russian mafia that you must take out. Throughout the game, he has visions where he is confronted over his actions by 3 masked figures: the cryptic rooster masked Richard, the hostile owl masked Rasmus, and the sympathetic horse masked Don Juan. The personality of the masked figures is seen by who wears them, the owl being worn by a member of the Russian mafia, who is understandably hostile as his team is being taken down one by one by your character, the horse being worn by a girl that you later save in the game, and the rooster being worn by you, the player. During a raid on the estate of a movie producer, your character rescues a woman and brings her home, nursing her back to health and later building up a relationship with her. In another mission, you are called to a phone company where you find everyone dead except for a lone biker whom you fight and subsequently kill. You find other animal mask killers dead, or at least dying during some of the assignments. After most of them, you visit a store or restaurant where the same bearded clerk greets you and gives you encouragement and free merchandise such as pizza, movies, and alcohol. Your character's perception of reality becomes increasingly surreal as he begins to see the talking corpses of his victims during his everyday life. The bearded clerk abruptly dies, his bloody corpse remaining at his place of work, and he is replaced by an abrasive, bald man, Richter, who offers you nothing. One day, you arrive home to find your girlfriend murdered and a man in a rat mask on the couch, who shoots you in the chest. It is revealed after this that everything up to this point was a coma dream. You were put in a coma after being shot and relived the game's events while comatose. You wake up in a hospital and overhear that your attacker is in police custody, whereupon you escape and storm Miami police quarters, killing everyone residing inside. You discover your attacker was Richter, who had also been following the orders of threatening messages. Your character punches Richter and interrogates him. After receiving his information, you steal the file on the police's investigation of the killings. You can then choose to either kill him by strangulation or to just spare him and walk away. Canonically, you decide to spare him, as seen in the sequel. With this, you raid the mob-owned nightclub the callers were tracked to, finding the address of the headquarters of Miami's Russian mafia. Your character then goes to this address and kills every living thing inside, including the syndicate's leaders. The game's main story ends with you killing off both of the Russian mafia's leaders. Afterwards, you can play bonus levels as Biker from the telephone company before, during, and after the incident. This leaves the story up to interpretation, as Biker wins when you play the fight out as him. Another recipient of the mysterious messages, Biker has gone fed up with carrying out their assignments, is trying to track down the callers. From raiding the phone company, he traces the calls to the mob-owned nightclub. At the nightclub, Biker finds a hidden basement where two people dressed as janitors, which have been lurking throughout multiple levels of the game, have been sending out the mysterious messages. If the players found secret letters hidden in the main game missions, the Biker will crack their computer's password and learn the janitor's work for 50 blessings, an ostensibly peaceful, patriotic organization, and have been using its membership to carry out killings to derail the Russo-American coalition, which is an alliance between the Soviet Union and the United States. The janitors boast their experiment is only the tip of the iceberg of a larger conspiracy. Without the password, the janitors claimed that they were acting out of boredom and mock Biker's attempt to rationalize his actions. Most of the characters in Hotline Miami don't actually have a name. The names given to them are mostly by fans, like the player being named Jacket after his iconic Letterman jacket, and Beard, who works at every shop and restaurant your character goes to. Like a moth to a flame, I always come back to Hotline Miami, even after playing it so many times. The story and gameplay have a certain buzz to it. I managed to lose myself in this game time and time again. There's an odd thrill to murdering a bunch of people when someone tells you to. It's honestly like being on acid with how euphoric it is. Again, the story isn't hard to follow, and I highly recommend not skipping all of the text boxes because there's some damn good quotes in there. If you don't pay attention to the plot, then that's fine, because the gameplay is still good. But if I find out you haven't been analysing the plot and enjoying it, I swear to God I will. There's not much to say on level design because there aren't any special chambers or anything like that, and the levels aren't random. But what I can say is that it is simplistic in my opinion. This isn't to say that it isn't good. I mean, there's many different ways you can approach the level with all the different entrances and things like that, but it is fairly simple. Enemy placement is good too. I never felt overwhelmed by enemies or that I was powerless against them. You always know what is around the corner and you can plan accordingly, as the levels feel as though they're in your control, not the enemies, which is the opposite in the sequel, which I'll come on to later. The levels are tough though, so be ready to redo the same level multiple times or quit the game and come back later, but overall, level design's great. I mean, you can plan ahead and it gives you that freedom, especially that you can scope out enemies. The game is great, and honestly, there's only a few minor flaws that I picked up by playing it. I think there's a bit of an unfair advantage where you can't see enemies off screen and they can get a perfect shot on you. The only way that you can avoid this is by locking onto them before, but then if there's enemies before then, you can't shoot the enemies before because you're locked on to an enemy like way past them. The boss battles abandon the open-ended strategy like the rest of the game too. When you go into the level, you can choose whichever way you want to approach it, but with the boss fights, that's stripped away. It's understandable because it is just a boss fight, but it is a bit annoying that that freedom is taken away from you. Also, there was a rape depiction controversy when the demo showed in the tutorial the player attempting to assault a woman sexually as the pig butcher. The scene is then interrupted by the director revealing that the whole sequence was a film shoot. Because of this, the game was refused classification in Australia, meaning that it couldn't be on sale within the country, which pushed Devolver Digital and Denaton Games to have a cut and uncut option. Denaton Games even suggested that people in Australia should pirate the game if they are unable to purchase a retail copy. Hotline Miami was a great first impression to this series with its action-packed gameplay and 80s arcade visual style. If you're a fan of gore, then I'd recommend it to you. It's not actually too gory in my opinion, but if you're squeamish, then maybe not play this game. It's so fast-paced, it constantly has you thinking on your toes without a moment to breathe, except for at the start of the level where you can plan out everything. Plot is engaging, and if you don't care for it, the game is still pretty good without the plot line. Following the events of the first game, we see the aftermath of Jacket's story and the backstory. The game was developed and published by the same companies and was released in 2015. The gameplay of Wrong Number is the same as the first, with the addition of hard mode, which you can unlock after completing the entire game. This mode makes enemies more difficult to take down, and some abilities are taken away, such as the enemy locking mechanic. There are 13 characters in total to play from, each with their own interpretations as the story unfolds. Again, each character has a different ability, but they will have a different perspective on the story. As well as the base game, there is a level editor that lets you create original stories in the Hotline Miami style. The soundtrack is still great too, and it was the only thing keeping me going during this game because I died too many times the count. It's also a slightly longer game of around 8.5 hours, but you'll probably end up spending way more time than that with the amount of times you'll have to redo each level. With the original focused on the experience of a single killer and treated the introduction of a second protagonist as a key plot beat, Hotline Miami switches between characters and eras with every level. The plot follows threads in 1985, 1989, and 1991, encompassing dream sequences, flashbacks, killing sprees that turn out to be movie scenes, that turn out to be dream sequences, that turn out to be flashbacks, and so on. It's very confusing. Following the events of Hotline Miami, Jacket has been arrested after killing off the leadership of the Russian mob by 50 Blessings, a neo-nationalist terrorist cell that masquerades as a peaceful activist group, gaining nationwide infamy. The game follows several playable characters in a series of intersecting plot lines. There's Martin Brown, a sadistic actor who uses his role in the film Midnight Animal to live out his violent fantasies. The Fans, a group of copycat killers seeking to emulate Jacket. Evan Wright, a journalist who seeks to write a book about the killings. Manny Pardo, a detective who mainly uses violence to dispatch criminals. The Soldier, the basis of the shopkeeper from Jacket's hallucinations in the first game, who's a part of a commando squad with Jacket in Hawaii. The son of the Russian mafia boss of the first game, who seeks to return the Russians to power against the Colombian cartel. The henchman, who seeks to retire from the mafia. Jake, an obese, violent, and nativist member of 50 Blessings. And Richter, a reluctant operative of 50 Blessings who was threatened into committing the murders, both of whom were active alongside Jacket in 1989. Furthermore, Richard, a mysterious figure in a rooster mask that occasionally appeared in the original game, appears at different points to most of the game's playable characters, taunting and criticizing them for their actions throughout the game. In 1991, Jacket is undergoing trial for the series of killings he perpetrated. Meanwhile, journalist Evan Wright is working on a book about the killings and trying to learn more about the people behind it. Evan is given leads by his friend Manny Pardo, a police detective who uses his position to go on killing sprees during stakeout operations, justifying them as self-defense. A slasher film adaptation depicting Jacket as the Pig Butcher is also being produced to capitalize on his infamy. The film's star, Martin Brown, dies. He's accidentally shot by his fellow actress with live ammunition on set during the shooting of the film's final scene. The fans carry out a string of murders against petty crooks and drug dealers, unaware of the larger context of Jacket's campaign of violence. Eventually, they kill a former henchman of the Russian mafia, and when his boss attempts to reconnect with said henchman, the fans trace his call to his new hideout. The fans are all killed during this attack. The last survivor, Tony, is personally killed by Pardo after attempting to surrender to the police to deny him his 15 minutes of fame. Following this, Pardo has a nightmare wherein he is outed as the Miami Mutilator, a serial killer he has seemingly been after to attain fame similar to Jacket, and barricades himself in his home. In 1985, the soldier and his squad were conducting special operations against Soviet forces in Hawaii. However, their psychologically troubled colonel begins to lose grip on reality as the war proceeds, volunteering them for increasingly desperate and dangerous missions while ruminating on their impending deaths and the loss of the war. The last assignment involves besieging a heavily guarded power plant controlled by the Russians. As they make their way into the building, the commander in charge, having apparently gone insane, murders the plant's technicians and begins a meltdown on the main reactor before shooting himself in the head. The soldier saves Jacket's life during their escape attempt after a booby trap explodes and severely injures 2 members of their unit, including Jacket, but dies a year later during a nuclear strike on San Francisco, which decisively terminates the war in the Soviets' favor, revealing his appearances to be Jacket's comatose hallucinations. In 1989, Jake and Richter are sent on individual missions parallel to Jacket's. Jake realizes the officially peaceful 50 Blessings organization has been the one giving him orders all along when he meets with one of their representatives who denies everything. Afterwards, he is sent on a suicide mission, which ends differently depending on the player's actions. If the player fails, he is captured, tortured, and eventually killed by the Russian mafia. And if he succeeds, 50 Blessings take him to a safe house and kills him anyway to silence him. Richter is revealed to be reluctant to work with 50 Blessings until they threaten his ailing mother. Richter is eventually captured and imprisoned, but manages to escape during a prison riot orchestrated by 50 Blessings to kill him to keep him from corroborating Jacket's testimony. Back in 1991, the escaped Richter shares his story with Evan in exchange for plane tickets for his mother to come to Hawaii. Evan's marriage and finances, however, are under pressure as he spends more time working on his book. He must choose whether he abandons the book or his family. Meanwhile, the son is trying to reclaim his father's empire from Colombian gangsters who filled the power vacuum his father's death left. After the son eliminates the Colombians, he invites his old henchmen to visit their new hideout, inadvertently giving away his location to the fans and triggering the attack depicted earlier. Under the influence of his own designer drugs, he goes on a rampage, killing his own men in addition to the superhuman monsters he sees the fans as, then walking off the hideout's roof on a rainbow bridge to his death. The epilogue shows Richter reunited with his mother and hearing on the news that the American and Soviet presidents were both assassinated, with the prime suspect being an American general. The Soviet Union declares this an act of war and launches several nuclear attacks against the United States, which obliterate Miami and Hawaii. Each of the surviving characters are then shown in their last moments. Manny drunk and pointing his gun at his barricaded door. Evan either working on his book or eating with his family, depending on the player's actions. The actress from Midnight Animal, and finally Jacket alone in a prison cell before being obliterated by the bombs. Subsequently, starting a new game adds an extra introductory scene where Richard berates the playable characters for once again starting down a path that can only end in their deaths. The plot in this game is a lot less straightforward than the first. Perspectives change and it can be difficult to keep up if you're not paying attention. I personally found that the story in this one was lacking compared to the first game, but it was still pretty good when I actually paid attention. What's cool about this game though is that if you bought the special edition of this game, you would unlock Jacket as a playable character in Payday 2. The level design in this one is the same as the last. However, while the first half of the game is good, the second half is interesting. The size of each level means that enemies are placed way off screen, and so you can't plan ahead by scoping out the area, because as soon as you start going down a corridor, there's probably going to be a few enemies there that you didn't see before, so you'll end up dying and restarting the whole mission again. The sheer number of enemies per level is an issue too. You'd think it'd be balanced because it's a big stage to run around in, but no. I find myself being overwhelmed with hordes of enemies surrounding me who could see me way off screen. And then there's so many windows that didn't need to be there, so they can literally just shoot through the window and kill you without you really seeing them beforehand. On top of this, you are never short on guns. They are everywhere. It's good if you want to run and gun and just maul every enemy down, but it's near impossible to be stealthy in this one compared to Hotline Miami. As stated earlier, the levels felt very much in the player's control in the first game, but in this one, the enemies are in control and it's difficult to finish a level on the first try. Where do I begin with the flaws? Hotline Miami succeeded and was a great game because it was very tight. You could melee enemies and sneak around in such a claustrophobic environment. Hotline Miami 2, however, abandoned all that made Hotline Miami a great series. It now had long, drawn-out fights against mobs of enemies that you had to fight off-screen. You couldn't improvise and plan like the first. You now had to memorize where each enemy was. I was a fan of the idea that you had multiple players who each had a different version of the original plot and beyond, but it all gets muddled up as you jump between dozens of characters, and there's too much text to read, so I found myself skipping a lot of dialogue. I haven't touched the hard mode in this game because I found the normal difficulty hard enough, so props to you if you managed to complete the hard mode, even completed a single level in it. On top of this, there are some melee proof enemies which I wouldn't mind. I think it would have been a good addition, but there is one character that will only fight with his bare fists and drops any lethal weapons, so he's basically useless in these levels. And if you don't have a gun as any other character or you've run out of ammo, then you'll just die and restart the level. In some cases, you're even forced to use certain weapons, which takes away more freedom that you originally had in the first Hotline Miami. There's also glitches in the game where mission critical items fall out of the play area, so you have to restart the mission. Hitbox problems when going around corners and doorways, executions aren't as useful anymore, some melee wielding enemies can kill you through a wall if you're hugging it on the other side. There's only 2 good guns out of the entire selection, and there's even a bunch of character specific issues that I won't go into because we'd be here all day. Hotline Miami 2 was meant to be great, but the only thing I saw worthwhile was the level editor. I definitely didn't enjoy this game as much as the first, and it just felt like a bad copy of the Hotline Miami series rather than a game made by the same developers. Buggy and clunky, and the story is too confusing to keep up with. I really wanted to enjoy this game because the first had me replaying it over and over again, but never in my life have I ever been more relieved to see level cleared before this one. The first game was hard, but it was balanced and rewarding, but after finishing a level in this game, it just feels like you get nothing from it but a headache from getting so angry. However, if you don't care too much about the story in this game, or like storylines like Wrong Number, then the game is enjoyable once you get past some of the glitches. Some of these flaws again are just personal gripes, like the level design, and after playing this game again, I did enjoy it a bit more than the second time around. But it's definitely, again, not as good as the first. I recommend you play both games if you haven't already, but the second one is definitely lacking in comparison to the first. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed that video. I'm sorry that I haven't uploaded in like 4 months. It's because, I was moving to uni, so I had to move like across the country. I also got engaged. Well, I asked my then girlfriend to marry me, and now we are engaged. Yoo-hoo! I've also made a Discord server, which you can check out in the description below. It's not as cool as I would like it to be, and it's not as full, but like if you want to play games with like some of my friends or with myself, then yeah, get on the Discord server. It's alright. There's not much to do there though. I'm hoping more people will join, but if you don't, that's fine. I actually rarely use Discords, so yeah. Anyway, hopefully I've enjoyed this. If you did, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.